Kelly's fingers stopped over the elegant place card. She read it once. Then again. The family mistake. The words were written in gold calligraphy, centered neatly between two crystal wine glasses, as though someone had spent extra time making sure every guest would notice. Across the round table, laughter broke out. Richard leaned back in his chair, lifted his champagne flute, and grinned. "Well," he announced loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "at least the seating chart is finally honest." More laughter followed. Kelly looked instinctively toward her mother. Her mother had already seen the card. For one hopeful second, Kelly expected her to stand up, take the card away, tell Richard he'd gone too far. Instead, her mother forced a strained smile. "Oh, Richard," she murmured, "let's just enjoy tonight." That was it. No apology. No defense. Just another request to pretend nothing had happened. Something inside Kelly became perfectly still. She reached for her water glass, then stopped. "No," she said quietly. She picked up a silver spoon instead and tapped it gently against her champagne flute. Clink. The ballroom slowly fell silent. "I'd like to make a toast," Kelly said. She paused long enough for every face to turn toward her. "To the last day you'll ever call me family." The silence that followed was louder than the laughter had been. More than 100 people had gathered to celebrate my mother's retirement after 38 years as a public school principal. I'd helped reserve the ballroom. I'd negotiated the catering contract. I'd even paid for part of the evening because Mom insisted the budget was getting out of hand. Not one person in that room knew that. They only knew Richard's version of every story. To them, I was simply his wife's daughter, the quiet one who always arrived early, fixed problems without being asked, and disappeared before anyone noticed she'd done the work. That had been my role for over 20 years. After my father died, Richard entered our lives carrying sympathy, confidence, and endless promises that he'd take care of us. He never yelled at me. Never hit me. He didn't have to. He perfected something far more difficult for outsiders to recognize. Whenever family photographs were taken, he'd casually wave me toward the edge. Whenever someone praised one of my accomplishments, he'd smile politely before changing the subject. When relatives introduced me to strangers, they usually repeated the title he'd started using years earlier. "This is Richard's wife's daughter." Never Kelly. Never our asterisk daughter. Certainly never my father's daughter. At first, I thought those moments were accidents. After enough birthdays where my gift somehow disappeared beneath everyone else's. After enough holidays where my chair somehow ended up separated from the immediate family. After enough celebrations where someone joked that I was too serious or too sensitive whenever I looked uncomfortable. I stopped believing in accidents. I kept telling myself the next year would be different. Mostly because my mother kept asking me to believe that. "Please," she'd whisper after every gathering, "be the bigger person. Richard doesn't always think before he jokes." So I became the bigger person. Again. And again. And again. Until the place card sitting in front of me told me exactly who they believed I was. Richard chuckled, as if my toast had been nothing more than another dramatic reaction. "There she goes," he said to the guests, "always making everything about herself." A few uncertain laughs escaped around the room. I didn't answer him. Instead, I reached into my leather portfolio and removed a thick, sealed folder. Without a word, I laid it neatly on my empty chair. Then I picked up my purse. My mother finally stood. "Kelly, please don't leave." I met her eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't search them for permission. I simply nodded once. Then I walked toward the ballroom doors. Behind me, I heard chairs scraping across the floor. Someone had picked up the folder. A familiar voice, my uncle's, broke the silence. "Richard." There was a long pause. And what is this? The hotel hallway felt strangely quiet after the noise of the ballroom. The thick carpet softened Kelly's footsteps as she walked toward the elevators without looking back. Her vision blurred for a moment, but she refused to stop. She had promised herself one thing before walking into the retirement party. No matter what happened, she would not cry in front of them. The elevator doors slid open. She stepped inside alone. Just before the doors closed, muffled voices echoed down the hallway from the ballroom. Someone was shouting. She didn't wait to hear who. 22 years earlier, Richard hadn't arrived in their lives as a villain. He'd arrived carrying casseroles after her father's funeral. He fixed broken cabinet doors. He mowed the lawn. He sat beside Kelly's grieving mother and promised she would never have to worry about money again. For a little girl who had just lost her father, that sounded comforting. At first. Then little things began changing. When neighbors visited, Richard introduced Kelly differently. This is Linda's daughter. Not, this is my daughter. Not even, this is Kelly. She became an attachment instead of a person. The distinction seemed small. Until it happened every single time. Years later, when Kelly graduated first in her law school class, Richard smiled politely during dinner. Estate planning, he said with a shrug. I suppose somebody has to do paperwork. The conversation immediately shifted to his golf tournament. When Kelly made partner at her firm, Richard congratulated her by asking if lawyers still had time to get married. When she purchased her first home without help from anyone, he joked that attorneys were professional paperwork collectors. Every achievement somehow became smaller after Richard spoke. Every celebration quietly became his stage. Her mother always noticed. She simply never interrupted it. Later, usually while washing dishes or loading leftovers into containers, she'd touch Kelly's arm. You know Richard doesn't mean it. I don't think that's true anymore, Kelly had answered once. Her mother's expression tightened. Please, just be the bigger person. Kelly always gave the same answer. I am. Then she'd hug her mother goodbye and leave before saying everything she actually wanted to say. The irony was almost unbearable. Whenever the family faced a real problem, Richard called Kelly first. Tax notices, property paperwork, questions about wills, business contracts. He'd appear at her office carrying a stack of folders and his usual confident smile. You're the expert, he'd say. Take a quick look. Kelly never charged them. She reviewed everything, corrected mistakes, prevented expensive legal errors, protected the family again and again. No one else ever knew. At family dinners, Richard accepted every compliment for keeping everything organized. Kelly never corrected him. Not because she was afraid. Because exposing him would hurt her mother. 6 months before the retirement party, Richard arrived at Kelly's office without an appointment. He closed the door behind him. I need you to sign something. He slid a folder across her desk. I've decided it's time to simplify family decision-making. Kelly opened the documents. Within seconds, her professional smile disappeared. Where did these come from? Our financial advisor. She kept reading. The paperwork wasn't simplifying anything. It would quietly transfer significant legal authority over several family matters, including authority that wasn't Richard's to receive. She looked up. I can't sign this. Richard's smile faded. You mean you won't? I mean these documents are inappropriate. His voice hardened. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No. Kelly gently closed the folder. I'm preventing a mistake. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Richard stood. You've always had trouble understanding where you belong in this family. He walked out without another word. After that day, every family gathering became noticeably colder. Conversations stopped when Kelly entered a room. Invitations arrived later than everyone else's. Richard became almost theatrical in the way he excluded her. By the time the retirement party arrived, Kelly no longer believed any of it was accidental. She suspected tonight's humiliation was punishment. Not for embarrassing Richard. For refusing to give him something he wanted. The elevator reached the lobby. Kelly stepped outside and crossed toward the hotel entrance. The cool evening air finally filled her lungs. Her phone vibrated. One new message. She opened it. Everything has been delivered. Nothing more. No explanation. No signature. Just the confirmation she'd been waiting for. Kelly looked back through the hotel's glass entrance. Inside, guests were gathering around the ballroom doors instead of celebrating. The evening had already changed. She slipped her phone back into her purse, turned toward the parking lot, and kept walking. What exactly had she left inside that sealed folder? Inside the ballroom, no one returned to their seats. The band had stopped playing. Servers stood frozen beside silver trays, unsure whether to continue pouring champagne or quietly disappear. Every eye was fixed on the sealed folder resting on Kelly's empty chair. Richard reached for it first. He forced a laugh. "Honestly," he said, shaking his head, "you all know Kelly. She loves making dramatic exits." He broke the seal. For a brief moment, his expression remained confident. Then he turned the first page. The color drained from his face. His jaw tightened. He flipped to the second page. Then the third. Without saying a word, he snapped the folder shut. "Private legal paperwork," he said quickly. "Nothing anyone else needs to worry about." He tucked the folder under his arm. "We should get back to celebrating Linda." No one moved. Richard's older brother frowned. "If it's private," he said, "why would she leave it in the middle of the party?" Richard answered too quickly. "Because she's upset." "Then why address it to everyone?" Silence. Kelly's mother stepped forward. "Richard." She held out her hand. "Let me see it." He smiled, but it looked strained. "I'll explain everything later." "No." She kept her hand extended. "I'd like to read what my daughter left." For the first time that evening, Richard didn't immediately answer. The hesitation was impossible to miss. Several relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Before Richard could react, 16-year-old Ethan, Kelly's cousin, reached across the table and pulled a loose page that had slipped from the folder. "Hey." He scanned the heading. "This says." Richard lunged toward him. "Ethan, give me that." Too late. The teenager had already read the first line aloud. "Notice of removal of administrative authority, Morgan Family Security Trust." The room went completely still. "The Morgan what?" someone asked. "I've never heard of that," another relative whispered. Neither had Kelly's mother. She looked from the paper to Richard. "What trust?" Richard laughed nervously. "It's just legal terminology. Kelly likes making things sound complicated." His explanation landed badly. Several people knew Kelly. She wasn't theatrical. She was meticulous. If she'd prepared legal documents, she hadn't done it for attention. She'd done it for a reason. Richard snatched the page away. "Enough." He looked toward the catering manager. "Please continue serving dinner." The manager hesitated. No one was sitting down. Clusters of relatives had already formed around the tables. Instead of discussing Linda's retirement, they were whispering about legal notices and trusts no one had known existed. The celebration was unraveling in plain sight. Richard's smile became thinner. "I said dinner is being served." No one listened. Kelly's aunt quietly picked up another document Richard hadn't noticed. She adjusted her glasses. "This one has Kelly's law firm's letterhead." Richard stepped toward her. I'll take that. She didn't hand it over. Instead, she read one sentence aloud. Effective immediately. Richard Morgan holds no authority over trust administration or protected family assets. The words seemed to echo through the ballroom. Someone gasped. Another guest slowly lowered his wine glass. Richard's confident posture finally cracked. She's twisting things, he snapped. She's trying to embarrass me because she's angry. His brother folded his arms. If that's true. He nodded toward the document. Why does it have today's filing date? Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Kelly's mother stared at the papers scattered across the table. Her confusion was no longer mixed with embarrassment. It had become suspicion. She looked directly at Richard. Her voice was calm. Almost too calm. Richard. He finally met her eyes. Why would Kelly have the legal authority to remove you? The question hung over the ballroom. No one spoke. Richard looked around the room as if searching for someone who might rescue him. Instead, every face waited for his answer. He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It's being taken out of context, he said. Kelly's an attorney. She knows how to make ordinary paperwork sound intimidating. His brother frowned. So explain it. I will. When? Richard glanced toward the musicians. They don't need to hear family business. His brother didn't move. We're already hearing it. Linda stepped closer. Her hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. Richard, answer the question. He sighed dramatically. Years ago, your late husband set up a small planning account. Kelly has always been overly protective of it. A planning account, Linda repeated. That's all. He reached for the documents again. I'll deal with this tomorrow. But no one handed them back. From the back of the room, an elderly voice interrupted. I don't believe that's accurate. Heads turned. Harold Benson, one of Linda's oldest family friends, slowly stood with the help of his cane. He had known Kelly's father since college. I remember that trust, Harold said. It wasn't some little planning account. Richard stiffened. Harold, with respect, you don't know the details. Harold ignored him. I was with Daniel the week before he passed. Daniel. Kelly's father. He told me he'd created something permanent. Harold looked directly at Linda. He wanted to make absolutely certain that no matter what happened in the future, you'd always be financially secure. Linda blinked. I don't remember that. You weren't supposed to worry about it then, Harold replied softly. He handled it quietly. Richard stepped forward. That's enough. Harold raised an eyebrow. No. You weren't involved. I knew your husband. Richard's jaw tightened. Linda slowly picked up another page from the folder. This time, Richard didn't try to stop her immediately. She began reading. The document wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was an accounting review. Attached behind it were copies of correspondence. Letters. Emails. Formal requests. Each one carried Richard's name. Each one requested expanded authority over trust assets. Each one had been denied. She turned another page. Another denial. Another request. Another denial. The dates stretched across several years. Her breathing slowed. She whispered almost to herself. You kept asking. Richard finally reached for the papers. They were standard, administrative requests. Linda stepped back before he could take them. Then why were they refused every time? He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. The trustee misunderstood. The trustee. Linda interrupted. Kelly. Richard looked away. It was the first answer he couldn't control. Around the room, quiet conversations began connecting pieces that had never made sense before. So that's why Kelly handled all the legal paperwork. I remember Richard mentioning documents that were being delayed. Didn't Kelly fix that property issue last year? And the tax dispute. One memory after another surfaced. Every time the family had faced a complicated legal issue, Kelly had solved it. Every time. Richard had accepted the gratitude. His carefully maintained image began collapsing one recollection at a time. Outside, Kelly reached her car. She placed her purse on the passenger seat, but didn't start the engine. Her phone rang. It was her law partner. "It's official," he said. "The court recorded everything 23 minutes ago. No challenges. None that can stop it now." Kelly closed her eyes. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself a slow breath. "Thank you." She ended the call and rested both hands on the steering wheel. There was nothing more to do. Back inside the ballroom, Richard finally understood the same thing. Every filing, every notice, every legal protection. They were already effective. No argument at the party could undo them. No speech could erase signed court records. No joke could make the documents disappear. Linda looked at him with unfamiliar eyes. Not angry. Not heartbroken. Awake. Slowly, she slipped off her wedding ring. The soft gold band rested in her palm for a long moment. Then she placed it gently beside Richard's untouched dinner plate. The faint metallic sound echoed through the silent ballroom. She looked him straight in the eye. "Tell me everything." No one left the ballroom. The retirement dinner had become something entirely different. Richard stared at the wedding ring lying beside his plate, as though it belonged to someone else. Linda folded her hands. "I'm done guessing," she said quietly. "I'm done accepting half answers. Tell me the truth." Richard looked around the room. Every familiar face that had once admired him was waiting. No one smiled. No one rushed to defend him. He cleared his throat. "It isn't as dramatic as Kelly wants everyone to believe." Linda slid one of the documents toward him. "Then explain it." He didn't touch it. Linda picked up the first page herself. For years, she'd trusted Richard to handle anything involving investments, paperwork, or finances. She had never questioned him because she believed he was protecting their future. Now she read every line slowly. The documents explained exactly what Kelly had never spoken about. Years before his death, Daniel Morgan had created an irrevocable trust. Its purpose was simple. Everything he had worked for would remain dedicated to Linda's long-term financial security. The trust could not be redirected simply because Linda remarried. It could not become marital property. And it could not be controlled by anyone Daniel had not personally appointed. The successor trustee named in the documents was Kelly. Not because she was an attorney. Because she was Daniel's daughter. The person he trusted most to protect Linda if he was no longer alive. Harold nodded quietly. "That's exactly what Daniel told me." Linda lowered the papers. "I never knew." Harold's voice softened. "He wanted you to grieve your husband, not worry about legal documents." Another envelope inside the folder contained copies of correspondence spanning several years. Linda began reading. The first request was polite. Richard had asked for limited administrative authority over trust assets. The request had been denied. A second request followed months later. Denied. Then another. Each request asked for a little more control than the last. Some sought access to investment decisions. Others attempted to broaden his authority over protected property. Every response came back the same. Denied. Attached to several responses were Kelly's legal opinions explaining why the trust prohibited those changes. Linda looked up slowly. "You knew." Richard swallowed. "I believed I could manage things better." That isn't what I asked. You knew Daniel never intended for you to control any of this. Richard looked away. Silence answered for him. Everything suddenly fit together. The pressure Kelly had faced, the repeated requests to sign documents, the uncomfortable conversations, the coldness that began after Kelly refused. Richard hadn't been trying to simplify family affairs. He had been trying to obtain authority he was never entitled to have. When Kelly refused, humiliating her became another way to pressure her into giving in. The retirement party had been designed as one final public reminder of where Richard believed she belonged. The family mistake. Instead, it became the night every secret lost its protection. Linda covered her mouth. Memory after memory returned. Every holiday where Kelly had quietly accepted another joke. Every time Richard dismissed one of her accomplishments. Every occasion Linda had whispered the same sentence. Please be the bigger person. She realized Kelly had been carrying something far heavier than insults. She had been carrying responsibility, protecting the very woman who kept asking her to stay silent. Linda closed the folder. I need to speak with my daughter. Kelly had just started her car when her phone rang. It was her aunt. Please don't hang up. Kelly waited. Your mother wants to see you. Kelly closed her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she turned the engine off. I'll come back. Most of the guests had quietly left by the time Kelly returned. The ballroom looked almost unrecognizable. Half-cleared tables, wilted floral arrangements, cold dinners no one had finished. Linda stood alone near the windows. When she saw Kelly, she didn't try to explain herself. She simply walked over and embraced her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Linda whispered, I'm so sorry. Kelly remained still. I should have protected you. Another pause. I kept asking you to keep the peace. Kelly looked at her mother gently. I know. I thought I was holding the family together. You were trying. Linda shook her head. No. Tears rolled down her face. I was asking my daughter to carry the cost of everyone else's comfort. Kelly squeezed her mother's hands. I stayed because I wanted you to be safe. Linda looked at the folder resting on the table. You were protecting me all along. Kelly nodded. I wasn't trying to destroy the family. She glanced toward the empty chair where Richard had been sitting. I was protecting what Dad built and what he wanted for you. Richard left the hotel alone that night. Within weeks, he was formally removed from every role connected to the trust. Without access to decisions he had spent years trying to control, his carefully cultivated image quickly unraveled. Relatives who had laughed at the place card called Kelly one after another. Some apologized awkwardly. Others admitted they had mistaken her silence for weakness. She accepted their apologies without bitterness. But she no longer felt responsible for making them comfortable. Linda filed for divorce several months later. For the first time since Daniel's death, she reviewed every financial document herself. Kelly sat beside her, not as someone cleaning up another crisis, but as a daughter helping her mother begin again. Months later, they met for lunch at a quiet cafe. There were no speeches, no family audience, no careful pretending. They talked about ordinary things. Books, work, travel. For the first time in years, every conversation belonged only to them. Kelly still attended family gatherings from time to time, but only the ones where respect had replaced obligation. She no longer measured her worth by whether everyone accepted her. She had finally learned that protecting herself wasn't abandoning her family. Sometimes, it was the only way to honor the people who had truly loved her. Whenever she remembered the elegant place card waiting at her seat that night, she no longer felt ashamed. It had been meant to define her. Instead, It revealed exactly who everyone else had become. The only thing Kelly left behind at her mother's retirement party wasn't a sealed folder. It was the roll of asterisk, the family mistake. And she never carried it again.